Education here at Ozobot. Today we are joined by four of our amazing certified educators who are here to share the ways in which they enrich their students' learning experiences with Ozobot. As experienced educators, they have demonstrated creativity, innovation, and expertise in how they integrate technology into their core curriculum. Whether they teach pre-K, adults entering the education field, and any age in between. Our CEs are going to share insights on engaging students, sparking curiosity, making coding accessible and exciting, and integrating Ozobot into core contents. We are thrilled to have them here. I'm going to start by introducing each of them very, very briefly, and then we will overview their presentation topics. Before each speaker begins, I'll also share a brief bio with you. And then they'll each be screen sharing when it's their turn to present. So Sarah Phelps was going to start us off today. She is presenting on literacy skills with Ozobot. Then we will hear from Christine Thai-Pappa, who will discuss maximizing student engagement with learning standards through Ozobot Blockly. Next, Jana Gerard will walk us through how she uses Ozobots as a bridge to coding for in-service and pre-service educators. And last but certainly not least, Carly Sapp is here to present on using Ozobot to meet standards and ignite student engagement. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand things over to Sarah.
Thank you, Michaela. All right, let's share my screen. All right, it looks like it's good on my side. Are you good on your side too? Are you seeing it? Perfect.
We gotcha.
Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for being here this evening. As Michaela said, my name is Sarah Phelps. I am the CS and STEM program manager for an organization in Illinois, and I have 17 years in education. So I have worked extensively with elementary students, but also now get to help teachers K-12 find ways to meaningfully bring CS and STEM into their classrooms. And I always tell teachers, one of my favorite ways to do that is with Ozobot because it was the very first robot that I used in my own classroom. It is also the tool that I tended to use when I first got into my CS and STEM role to help get other teachers who maybe didn't think that CS fit into their classroom, particularly, classroom teachers. This was the best and easiest way for me to show them that CS could enhance, it could engage their students with the things that they were teaching them every day. Specifically, I found a lot of joy in bringing in Ozobot when it came to literacy time. So one thing that I think is amazing, and as I was preparing for this presentation, literacy no longer just includes our standard literacy skills, right? Phonics and comprehension, but also literacy has broadened to include tools and technology that enable communication. And we know that technology includes things like robots and other computer science related tools. So when we consider the role that computational thinking and computer science play in our classrooms, not only do they support literacy because they are literacy themselves, but they actually are a fundamental approach to problem solving that can absolutely support every other subject area as well. So reading, math, science, social studies, all of the above. So not only are we teaching students how to be better computational thinkers, that computational thinking perfectly complements our skills in our other subject areas as well. I like this graphic, and the research is linked in my presentation. So when you get that later, if you love research and you want to know more about the research related to computational thinking and literacy, you can read it all for yourself. When we talk about computational thinking, just to make sure we're all on the same page with definitions, typically we consider computational thinking skills to be things like algorithmic thinking, abstraction, decomposition, and using data models. And these are all skills that Ozobot can support and have a huge overlap in our content areas. So how do we develop computational thinkers? Well, things like tinkering, creating, debugging, or looking at maybe a solution that's not working and figuring out why, persevering when things don't work right the way that we want them to the first time, and collaborating together. And these are all 100% achievable with Ozobot. They happen so naturally, and they also happen so non-threateningly. Sometimes I was definitely a student who didn't love to make mistakes. I liked to get things right the first time. Persevering was something that I didn't really learn to do because I refused to fail, which gave me a lot of stress and anxiety. But I think most ultimately it came down to the fact that I didn't get opportunities to do that in a productive way. When I bring in Ozobot into the classroom with my students, I get to see them work through solutions. Sometimes they don't work, but the frustration is not the same as when we do, traditional assignments or traditional assessments, because the robot is fun. The robot is non-judgmental. The robot doesn't care if you get it wrong. You want to keep working until you get the solution that ultimately gets the job done. When you are first exploring the Ozobot classroom, which is just full of amazing resources, there are just a plethora of Ozobot activities specifically for literacy skills. So that was absolutely, I had classroom teachers when I would, talk with them and say, hey, is computer science something you've considered bringing into your classroom? Most of the time they would say no, and they would immediately follow that up with, and I don't have time, right? Time is the hottest commodity in education. Whenever we ask teachers what their biggest struggle is, time is almost always the number one thing that they wish they had more of, and they're always working against. So when I work with teachers to find computer science opportunities, typically what I try to do is find something that could replace, not be in addition to, but replace the traditional activity or assessment that supports the literacy skills that they're doing. So I'm going to share some activities with you that are tried and true, have been used, proven successful in classrooms, and each of them is actually linked to the activity that lives in the Ozobot library as well, so that you can use it later if it's something that you think might engage your students or teachers that you work with as well. So we know we've got those big areas of literacy like phonics and phonemic awareness. This is a actual activity that I did with kindergartners. You can see a sweet kindergartner there with her flexible seating. So in this activity, they were practicing CVC words. And this kindergarten teacher in particular was really kind of feeling the stress of trying to help students build that literacy skill, but also feeling like they were not particularly engaged. There was a high level of frustration by some students, and there was no time to bring in meaningful technology. When we talked about the skills that they were working on in class, and she shared that she was doing CVC words with her kiddos, I said, I think I have something that might not only help support the skill that you're doing in class, but also maybe increase engagement and give some students some confidence back that they feel like maybe is waning because they're struggling with this concept. So if you're not familiar with this activity, what happens is there is a activity page, and actually there are quite a few because it could be used as centers, but students have a CVC word that's missing the vowel. They have to read the word, identify the correct vowel, and then use Ozobot color codes to direct Ozobot to the appropriate vowel to finish the word. So you can see here, we're practicing left and right, which is a fabulous skill for kindergartners to practice. We also get to code a win at the end. So Ozobot does a happy dance when it gets to the correct word, which the kindergartners adore and just brings a smile to their face. 100% engagement on this activity. Even students who maybe were struggling with that concept were in it to win it. And the beautiful thing is this was not really that different than a worksheet that could have practiced the exact same thing, but Ozobot added a level of engagement that students maybe wouldn't have had with just a worksheet. The teacher was still able to assess their understanding of CVC words, and there was just a joy in the classroom. There was giggling, there was a lot of talking and collaboration. We did some together, and then students worked in a partner to help work through which way they should have the robot turn. They were practicing lots of computational thinking skills as they had to color in the correct code in the correct order so that Ozobot would actually turn the correct way. A easy, simple activity that had such an amazing impact and really helped a kindergarten teacher see how Ozobot could be something really special to support the literacy skills in the classroom. Word patterns are really something very easy to use with Ozobot. So this is another activity with word patterns. I was a fourth grade teacher, so CVC words were definitely not something that I used when I was in the classroom, but we did still do word sorts and identify patterns within words as part of our spelling curriculum. So this is an activity where this is just an example. Students are learning different patterns for a long E or a hard vowel sound or a long vowel sound. And so they get to identify what color codes they want to use for the different patterns. Then they look at the words and they identify which pattern follows the key, and they color that code in to help them sort in a new, unique way. It's a different way of sorting. It's still using the same tried and true method of looking at words, finding patterns, but it's bringing in a robot for some engagement. This is an activity that I would use over and over and over again. I could use it for word sorts and patterns, but I also could use it for sorting anything. I could sort verbs and nouns. I could sort proper nouns and common nouns. I could identify the difference between adverbs and adjectives. I could tell the difference between different animal groups, right? Sorting is very common practice in all of the different subject areas. And that's one thing that I want to tell you and empower you. If you find an activity that your students are successful at, they really like it, they're really engaged, you can modify it to meet your needs. You can take an activity like this and remix it and make it an activity that's meaningful to what you're doing in your classroom. We do summarizing with story elements with Ozobot. So this is a map that a student drew of the story of the wild robot. The amazing thing about this one was a fourth, fifth grade activity where they really didn't get a whole lot of support from me outside of the guidance was you had to include 6 major events from the story in your story map and use Ozobot code that would allow for the story to be retold. Again, the teacher would have done this activity in a worksheet or maybe done it as a writing, and they still did this as a writing after we used this as a scaffold. And students could work through some of the planning here on the Ozobot map and be incredibly engaged with Ozobot as they planned out their summary. Same idea, but for kindergarten, we all love the old lady stories where the old lady eats all kinds of things up and then eventually spits them all back out to produce something. This is the cold lady story where the cold lady eats all of the objects to create a snowman. Again, kindergarten put the objects in order as I read, they sequenced, and then they used code to bring that story to life. And it's amazing to walk around and hear students telling the story again, demonstrating their understanding of all of these literacy skills, but through a coding and computational thinking activity. Finally, this is a same idea, but for older students. This is our story mapping and sequencing with our traditional story components where we have the beginning, the problem, the climax, the solution. And again, we just used Ozobot to help reinforce those concepts and the code to be an engagement piece, but also to be an additional skill that students were able to learn as we did the activity. So in conclusion, incorporating Ozobot into literacy is such a meaningful way to engage students, to introduce and provide some opportunity for students to enhance their critical thinking, because as they're working, they're considering how to utilize the code so that it's meaningful in the context of the activity. They have to use it correctly or what they want the robot to do doesn't happen successfully. But they kind of complement one another because it's a new modality for learning the same concepts that, again, we could learn doing something like a worksheet or maybe just a standard activity in the classroom. We bring in a level of interest, but also just a different way to access the information. And always, we're looking for meaningful ways to incorporate things like collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking into the classroom. And Ozobot is such an easy way to do that. As I mentioned earlier, it's easy to do. Find activities that your students love or that have a great impact. If you really find one that you really think is effective, find ways to remix it. You don't have to have a new unique activity every single time. You can use one activity and reuse it by just switching out the words or switching out the thing that students are doing, but with the same exact Ozobot skills, so that you really can make the primary focus your content area, but have this amazing addition of computational thinking and computer science concepts. And always, the option always exists to give students a blank sheet of paper and tie it to any curriculum concept that you want to. That's all I have, and I hope that helps maybe inspire some ways to bring Ozobot into your literacy lessons, and just finding new ways to engage students with computational thinking, to help support some of the things that we already have to do. Again, this could be an instead. It doesn't have to always be an and. So thanks for letting me share that with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing. And again, you all will be able to have access to her email at the very end of this as well. And with that, I'm going to introduce to you our second presenter. Next, we will be hearing from Christine Thai-Pappa. Christine is a STEAM teacher in Northern Virginia. She works with students in grades pre-K through 5. She's taught kindergarten, second grade, and third grade. Christine has a master's in education and 15 years of experience working with learners to encourage them to reach their potential. She's passionate about students and teaching them as whole humans, tapping into their gifts and talents to build curiosity, deeper thinking, and creativity. Christine is an Ozobot certified educator, a Microsoft innovative educator expert, a book creator ambassador, Canva Canvassador, and national board certified educator. Christine, please take it away.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you. I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm going to share my screen and hopes that everyone is able to see it. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
I'm going to okay. So I'm super excited to be here just to share with you my love of Ozobot and also Ozo Blackly. So my focus today is just going to be on Ozo Blackly and how I use it in my classroom. I am currently a STEAM teacher, but I have been in the classroom. And so the reason why I pursue Ozo Blockly use, and that's what's really cool about Ozobots, is that it's that versatility where you can do line coding with color codes, but then there's also this option of Ozo Blockly that speaks directly to the robot through Bluetooth, or you can also flash code if you can't do the Bluetooth. But I love using Ozo Blockly because I do think that there is a wider range of actions. You can pick very specific light effects. You can add sounds to your Ozobot. You can make it play music. And then there's also the movements. There's a little bit more precision in the movements and the calculations for that, incorporating a lot of measurement. And then, of course, building that actual computer science coding skill. So this is an image of the Ozo Blockly platform, and you can see here that there are different levels that range from 1 to 5. I prefer level 2 in the elementary school, just so that it's not overwhelming, but there is some complexity involved. But again, just having the range of levels also offers the kids the ability to grow in their capability and skills with coding with block codes. So the way I usually start introduce Ozo Blockly to my kids, it's very different. Here's an image of my STEAM lab where I have the opportunity with my focus to do physical coding with our bodies and start with an unplugged process that leads up to the programming on a device. But when I was in the classroom, I went straight to using Shape Tracer or Ozotown, which are games that Ozobot provides free through their website, and it has levels, and it allows the kids to build their capacity slowly as they work through levels. And it's also a great opportunity for the kids to collaborate and support each other, while I had the opportunity to also circulate and support their understanding of block coding in that way. And I thought that was a pretty awesome tool to use with that wasn't a big lift on my part as a classroom teacher. So I start with what I call the physical grid because it is an actual thing that I will print out and give to the kids. So this is a blank one that I provide the kids, and I just made it in PowerPoint because in PowerPoint it allowed me to feed, I want each square to be 2 centimeters, and you can see here one Ozobot step in Ozoblockly is equivalent to about 1 centimeter. I found that the 2 centimeter block worked really well for Ozobot movement and also for what I would plug into the squares. And what I really liked about that was it was an automatic integration of skip counting or multiplication. And so automatically the kids had to incorporate math into their coding process. And through the use of this grid, I could do things like collecting and sorting, matching. I'll show you some examples of how I did that. So these are some science examples that I use. Being the STEAM teacher in my school, I push a lot of the science curriculum. Our second graders need to understand animal needs in second grade, and so they need to understand that animals need water, air, food, space, and shelter. So I present this grid. You can see I've populated some images in there. I have them start in that gray circle. And then I ask them to please program your Ozobot to move through the grid and collect all 5 needs, ending at the shelter at the bottom right. And so I gave them multiple options so that they could pick different courses, and nothing was ever exactly the same amongst my groups. I would break the kids up into pairs or smaller groups of 3, and they would collaborate and work together. And then then this would support, do they understand all the needs? And then how can you program your Ozobot to work through and collect? And so they would demonstrate collection by programming the Ozobot to move to a block and then adding a light effect. So when I saw the light effect, I knew that they were in the process of collecting. And so this was a quick way of really supporting the science standard and also exciting the kids. They get so excited to see their Ozobot move, to see that the code that they write actually has the robot moving as they would want it to. So here's a video. You can kind of see how the robot moves based on the code that they have written and that there are light effects. And sometimes just based on placement of the robot, it doesn't necessarily land perfectly, but it's enough that the kids understand and that I can understand. And so that is a second grade example. Similarly, this is animal adaptations. So our third graders need to understand that with the different types of adaptations, that there are physical adaptations and behavioral adaptations. I consider this a sort. So the kids would program the Ozobot to move to a type of adaptation. And then at the bottom 2 corners, they would have to program the Ozobot to move to the physical block or the behavioral block. And then they would demonstrate that to me, and that would be an indication of a sort, like they have sorted an adaptation to physical or behavioral. You can see here, they are linking camouflage and moving it to physical. And so what was really fun about this method is that I introduced a component of competition because the different teams would go against each other to see who could claim the most matches by the end of the block. And my STEAM blocks are about 45 minutes, and I was able to get the kids engaged, working on academic standards, and then coding as well. So, oops, I moved way fast. I'm sorry. So I also wanted to show you just here for math, it was a matching. We could work on rounding. I put a number with an underlined place that they knew they had to round that number to that place, the tens, the hundreds, the thousands, and then match it to the rounded version. They would demonstrate their work, write their code, and then here for English language arts, I used it for synonyms. You can see this is an example of how we colored in each block, and it looks like the red team claimed the most blocks in this one. Um, so just my quick planning process, I would start with reviewing the learning standards, identifying essential understandings, then determine if I wanted to use my grid to match, sort, or collect, which fit best, and then create the grid. And once you have that physical grid, you can easily populate images or type in numbers or words. And so it was not, again, a heavy lift. And so I wanted just to let you know that in Ozobot Classroom, there are some options there, some lessons I've created if you just kind of want to get some help breaking into the Ozoblockly. That is available as well. And I really hope that you venture into Ozoblockly. I think it's a really great way to build kids up and engage them with actual content. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. I love seeing that every time and the videos, the students. It's really cool. Our third panelist is Dr. Jana Gerard. Dr. Jana Gerard is the coordinator of the Edvolution Center and an adjunct faculty member at Southeast Missouri State University. Jana ensures that teacher candidates at SEMO are prepared to effectively and appropriately implement educational technology in their future classrooms. This is accomplished through providing instruction on digital literacy, competency, and citizenship through the lens of the ISTE standards for educators. Jana also provides students, faculty, and staff professional development on design thinking, coding, 3D printing, and virtual and augmented reality. Jana is an ISTE certified educator, Google certified educator, trainer, and coach, Apple teacher and learning coach, Microsoft certified educator, Microsoft innovative educator, DFIT ambassador, and an Ozobot certified educator. I'll hand it over to you, Jana.
It helps if I turn on my microphone, doesn't it? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So the thing that wasn't in my bio that I want to make sure I mention is I used to be a P12 teacher. I started my career as a library media specialist, and then I taught middle school ELA and technology, and I was also our buildings ed tech coach. So I haven't spent my whole career in higher ed. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that so everybody knew I do at least have a little bit of cred in terms of what happens in a P12 classroom. So I like to talk about what I call the coding conundrum. So when I talk to both pre-service and in-service educators about coding, I always ask people how they feel about it. And a lot of times I get that, they don't like it, it's hard, it's boring, they're scared of it, they don't understand it, it's frustrating. And so I got to thinking about how to make coding more accessible to both pre-service and in-service educators so that they would be more willing to use coding in their classrooms. So, I talked about them feeling like it's intimidating, and I would ask why. And they would say that, maybe they never really learned coding when they were in their pre-service program. Maybe they just don't feel prepared to be able to teach coding to students, and they don't want to, start a journey that they don't feel capable of finishing. And then, they also talk about they're not sure what tool to even start with. So I feel like Ozobot provides, an accessible, easily accessible tool that's also engaging. So I always talk about it having a short learning curve. So that's one way I get teachers and both in-service and pre-service teachers to engage with the Ozobot. So the students you see here are actually here at the center. We're doing a field trip. And the student who looks so young down here on the end is actually one of our students that is a pre-service educator. She is in what we call advanced block. So she next semester will actually be student teaching. And you can see these students here are working on coding. And one of the great things about this is these students had never coded before. We live in a very rural area. And so one of the ways we can bring coding into our local schools is schools can bring students here to our center, or things like the Ozobot that we have here at the center can be checked out and taken out into classrooms. So, teachers ask me why Ozobot, and that's very simple. First, they're small and they're easy to charge and they're easy to store, because we all know as teachers, storage is at a premium. So that's one of the things that I love about it. You don't need a lot of room for them. A lot of Ozobots take very little space. And especially with the new charging system, they're on a tray and you just plug it in and it charges all of them. And I love that it introduces coding in both a fun and interactive way. So you don't have to have a lot of talking at the students before they are able to get hands-on with the coding tool. I love that Ozobots are accessible to a wide range of ages. So, we all know we don't have a lot of funding in any school. And so we have to kind of get the most bang for our buck. And so Ozobot is one of those tools that allows us to, work with both pre-K and middle school and high school and elementary students. I've used it with students from pre-K to adults and everywhere in between. And it also can be used by students with a wide range of abilities. And then because it has the two ways to code, if students are already, kind of understanding the concepts of coding, those students can move on to Ozoblockly while the other students may still be using color code. So I love that it has a lot of ways for students to interact with it. So, you use Ozobot by drawing lines and color combinations on paper, and that's what makes them move. So I love that the specific coding sequences are color. And so, but that's easy to explain. You do this color and it creates this thing. I have to say tornado is my favorite. And if you've never seen tornado, it actually spins around really quickly in a circle. And, one of the best things about Ozobot is that you can hand someone a marker and they're not intimidated by a marker. My mom is in her 80s, and I actually was able to teach my mom how to code with an Ozobot. She was very proud. She took a video, she showed it to our server at the restaurant. She shares it with everyone, but she felt very accomplished because, she's kind of scared by her smartphone, but she was able to code a robot. So I do a lot of Ozobot PD with both pre-service and in-service educators. So the class that I teach is called EL 300, which is Instructional and Assistive Technology in Universally Designed Learning Environments. And so I teach that specific course to in-service educators. And one of the units we do inside that class is coding. And I always start with the Ozobot. But I also go to local school districts and regional and state conferences and make sure that educator preparation programs are prepared to teach coding to the pre-service educators, because then the pre-service educators can, serve as peer mentors out in the schools. I also work with our local school districts. Again, we're in a very rural area, so we try to be a resource to the community. But then I really feel like a target audience is our educator preparation faculty, because they, they're the ones that are going to teach the pre-service educators that can then go out and take that into the schools. So this is exactly how I teach coding, or how I introduce coding to my EL 300 students. We start with Simon Says. So like Christine mentioned, the physical representation of coding. So I'll give them a series of instructions, and then once they sit down, we talk about the instructions I just gave them. So we've got our input, and then what their movement is the output. And we talk about the action and the descriptors. And then because we talk a lot about UDL, we talk about how coding is symbolic representation, and that's a way of giving information to our students. And then I have them explore with the Ozobots, and I don't give them a whole lot of information. I give them the paper and the robot and the markers and the code sheet and say, go for it. And it's really interesting because that is what causes the critical thinking and the collaboration and the communication, is because they actually have to, if someone figures it out, then they can, share with others, oh, hey, I figured out how to turn it on. Oh, hey, if you do this, it does that. And then after they've had their Ozobot time, that's when we go into what skills have they been learning: the orientation, the sequencing, the debugging, the representation, the computational thinking. And then we talk about what computational thinking is. And so by the end of it, they have a sense of, oh, I actually do know how to code. I don't have to be scared by this. And so these are some of the ways I've seen both pre-service and in-service educators use Ozobot in the classroom. So creating a path between, so they'll have math problems on one side and solutions on another. They have to solve the problem and then create a path from the problem to the solution. Then there's using paths to do any kind of ordering, maybe what sentence, the order of a sentence, maybe it's the order of a story, maybe it's, the order of plot, any of that. And it can also be used for sequencing words, first, next, then, after, all of those things. This was one of the best ones that I saw. It was so adorable. It was a kindergarten class, and they were talking about bees, why bees are important. And so in a small group, they had Ozobots that were dressed up like bees, and then they had like a map of bushes and some other things, and they had to draw a way to get the bee to the bushes and then back to the beehive, and it was so cute. And so you can absolutely use them for science. And am I out of time? Sorry, I didn't mean to talk so long. So I will leave it there.
We could listen to you share all day, Jana. That was fantastic. Thank you. All right. Our fourth and final panelist this afternoon is Carly Sapp. Carly is a district innovation teacher in Redlands Unified, supporting 17 elementary sites with their technology and innovation needs. Before stepping into this role, she spent 15 years as a classroom teacher in grades 2 through 5. Carly has been using Ozobots for about 7 years. She loves helping teachers and students bring learning to life through hands-on and engaging experiences. She's passionate about making meaningful connections to the standards so that using Ozobot feels seamless rather than like one more thing to do. This is her second year as an Ozobot CE, and today she'll share lesson ideas she has developed with teachers to ensure you leave with practical ways to teach with Ozobot tomorrow. So y'all, if you came here for the examples, buckle up. Take it away, Carly.
Thank you, Michaela. All right, let me share and start my timer so I keep track of my time. Okay, so here we go. Lots and lots of ideas. You will be able to get all of this, so don't panic, but I'm going to be peppering you with lots of ideas. To start, if you haven't yet, I highly recommend signing up for the an Ozobot account so that you can create a free account to access all of the lessons. Some of the ones that Sarah, I think it was, referenced are in that Ozobot classroom. You have lots of lessons that Ozobot has created and also community lessons that other teachers have created. There's a couple that I've created that I have had published up there. So definitely make note of joining the classroom if you haven't yet. When I work with teachers, you've heard kind of over and over, time is a factor. and also just how am I going to fit it in? And so I teach, or I try to teach, pass along the idea of having teachers think like an Ozobot. So how can Ozobot support what they're already doing in the classroom instead of it making it feel like one more thing? So here are some different ways that I've worked with teachers to do just that. So here is a second grade class, and they are working on reviewing types of shapes. So this was a longer one because I wanted to make sure to get lots of examples in there. But they just had to sort. They're using different color codes depending on the type of shape, and they're having their Ozobot go through the path. So easily as a teacher, I can check their color codes to see if they are understanding the concept or if I need to do a little bit of reteaching right there. So these are all 4 of the cool moves. I'm also a huge fan of tornado, so you'll see that one used a lot. The next one I have, this is actually an adaptation from a lesson that was in the Ozobot community by Sarah Kunz. She created one and I just adapted it based on a second grade standard so that they could work on addition without regrouping. So this was just an example I made. So they're programming their Ozobot. Ozobot has a mind of its own, so unless you've told it to go straight or turn right or turn left, it will go wherever it wants. So that's how you're going to get the random numbers that it pulls. And then students are just creating math problems off to the side and working through them one by one, and then they set it up again and create a new problem. So we're still working on a standard, but it's so much more engaging, and you don't hear any complaining when you're using an Ozobot. Same idea here, just a different standard. I was actually able to use the exact same one with the same numbers with first grade. So there's lots of crossover, as you've heard from other ambassador educators as well. This one is a first grade standard, again, using the same template, just changing up the numbers. So because I do support 17 elementary schools, grades TK through 5th, any way that I can kind of reuse things, the better. Same thing as a teacher. If I can reuse one template and just change things up a bit, then that's what I'm going to do. So this was a first grade one, just doing addition within 20. This is one, again, same template, different numbers. So this is for third grade. They were working on multiplication facts, so it just created random multiplication facts for them. And then this one was actually a partner activity, and they then had to circle the sum, actually not the sum, excuse me, it should say product, circle the product that is the greatest. This next one is using Ozoblockly. This I did with a second grade class, and Ozoblockly, we programmed the Ozobot to say 6 different random numbers. So that's the code off to the right. As a teacher, you can walk the students through how to create that code, but you also can send it to them. So don't be afraid of that part of it. The great thing about this is the Ozobot itself is not very loud. So you could hear a pin drop in a classroom when they're doing this because they have to be really quiet in order to hear their Ozobot say the number. So that's always a fun aspect of it. But again, they're just getting random numbers said out loud and they're just writing them down and then adding them up. So another fun one. This one I created, this was like one of my originals. So shout out to Carrie Willis. I think I saw her name on here. She was a huge help when I was first getting started with Ozobot. I think I asked her 1,000,001 questions. So thank you, Carrie. But this one was just a fun one that I created where students had to program their Ozobot to go around the timer. And then I would give them a little sheet where they had to do some math facts off to the side. And their goal was to complete all of the 6 problems within the amount of time that the Ozobot went around the timer. What's kind of funny with this one is students love seeing it go fast, and inevitably students will program their Ozobot to go speed racer style around this timer. And they're like, ah! They didn't have time to actually do the problem. So kind of a lesson in when to use appropriate codes. But I use Avery labels, so we could just cover up their code and they could start again. So little trick, use those Avery mailing labels so that you don't have to go through tons and tons of worksheets. All right, so now into some English language arts ideas. This is a second grade phonics practice. They were focusing on the sounds ow like in cow and like in book. So I just put different words around. And again, as a teacher, I could easily walk around and see, based on the color code, who was understanding the phonics skill and who needed a little bit of extra practice. So I often will use codes that are completely different in look, so it's an easier look for me when I'm walking around. So this is a good one. And again, an easy one that you could switch out the words every week or every couple of weeks just to keep it fresh and new in your classroom. This is one that I created for 3rd grade, and it was a grammar review. It's really a review of a 2nd grade standard, but the students were having trouble discerning between a complex subject and a complex predicate. So here, again, same template, same codes, just changed out the words. So you don't have to reinvent something every single time. This was a fun one. I heard another presenter talk about you don't always have to have a pretty paper. So I just gave them white construction paper, and we have retelling cards that go with our story. And so students had to cut them out and write a sentence that went with the picture to describe what was happening in that part of the story, but they could create any path that they wanted with their Ozobot. So you can see some got a little crazy, some were a little more linear, but a really engaging activity. And there's certain steps that they would have to perform before they could actually get the Ozobot. So lots of engagement, lots of hands-on learning and partner work and things like that. This is a science example. I had a teacher reach out. She was working on seasons, the review of the 4 seasons. So you can see here that she had some pre-made cut and paste worksheet where they had to cut and label the season correctly. They then had to draw a picture to go with it as well. And then they could choose which Ozobot color code they wanted to put to represent going into each of the different seasons. So not a complicated template or lesson, but still engaging and still supporting the ideas that they're learning in science. All right, this was one that I used when I taught 2nd grade. It's not a 2nd grade standard anymore, but we would focus on life cycle of a frog. And so I would have students at the very bottom, you can see the frog pictures, and I would have them cut those out and glue them on the paper in order so I could see if they understood the cycle, and then they could program their Ozobot at each of the phases. They could have it to be a speed code or a cool move, having 4 spots. This is a 5th grade science idea. This actually comes from the Ozobot online account that I was talking to you about. This is an Ozobot lesson called Energy Food Chain. I have linked it here as well. What's great about, I won't say all of them, but a lot of the Ozobot lessons is there will be YouTube videos that will take the students through step by step. So sometimes if I'm reading a lesson plan, there might be a question about like, oh, I'm not quite sure what that looks like. There might be a YouTube video that will walk them through that step or help you to understand that step. So this was really nice because it gave them some choice about their producers and consumers, and then they could program their Ozobot to go through the food chain. This is another Ozobot community lesson called Pollination Garden that I did with 2nd graders. Again, if I don't have time to put things together, YouTube Ozobot lesson to the rescue. So this was a really fun one. You can see it had a costume included that students could work on the idea of pollination. This was a map created by my amazing colleague, Jennifer Vadney. She is our ArcGIS specialist. And so a teacher reached out working on California's native peoples. And so they were looking at where the different groups are located. And so I just helped her with a little bit of some of the coding and support in the classroom, but an easy way to connect social studies as well. And there's my timer, which is just right, because here's the last one. This was a 5th grade classroom. They do state fair projects every year where they get to focus on one state. And so they were just tasked with kind of hitting different landmarks throughout the state and program their Ozobot to go through the state. So those are just some fun examples that they came up with. They could add 3D or 2D objects to go with it. So hopefully some of these ideas got you thinking like an Ozobot. Have fun.
Thank you so much, Carly. And for those of you who are having a hard time seeing the screens, there are some tabs at the top that you can switch over, but have no fear. The recording that we'll send you all the participants and your emails, will have all the beautiful slides and screen sharing that was a part of today's meeting if you were one of the folks who was not able to see it. And sorry about that. But we still have 5 minutes, and you just heard from and saw some incredible ideas of ways to start off or to integrate Ozobot into your teaching and learning. And so we have time for probably one or two questions. And so if you'd like to type a question into the chat and specify who it's for, or just if it's for the whole group, that's fine too. And we'll just take the first couple questions that we see. Yes, they're all great ideas. I totally agree. Take about 10 more seconds to take any questions. Lizette, a symposium for higher grade levels. Great question. Yes, that is something that we have thought about and have in the works. The reality is that we don't have as many folks, as many certified educators who teach the higher grades, and so we started with lower, but absolutely. Thank you for the suggestion. Any other questions? All right. Any ideas to help kids with fine motor concerns do the coding with markers?
Can I go ahead and jump in on that one? I actually talked to our special education faculty about that because I was concerned, and they had a couple of good suggestions. The first was work in pairs. So you have someone who maybe is a little bit stronger in their fine motor skills, work with a student who maybe isn't as strong in their fine motor skills. But there's also some adaptive equipment available to students. We actually 3D printed a little piece of adaptive equipment that made it so it was easier for the student to use the marker.
Any other panelists that have a response to that? Thank you, Jana. It was mentioned earlier, and I know the question was specific about the markers, but also our magnet tiles are wonderful for students who, holding the markers is a challenge. Yeah. Oh, and Jen just put those in the chat. All right, and here we have a question about the Avery labels. How do you print them? How do you get them, Carly?
So I just buy them. I don't print anything on them, but they act as a good paper alternative. So if they do make a mistake because you can't erase the marker, I just rip off a little piece of it and put it over their mistake so that they can go back and have a second try.
Right. Any other? I see we're answering some questions in the chat. Beautiful. Cool. We have time for maybe one more question. All right. I will consider that